Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, I get a bit stage right. I'm already tall enough, so I don't really want to be another 2 foot tall, so I'm going to stand here. First, I'd like to thank the organizers, Rachel in particular, for inviting me, and I'm really pleased that she's had a result with this. I think it's wonderful up and down the country that more and more people are becoming aware of multidimensional phenomena and our true heritage, as beings beyond just a physical body. So yeah, big thanks to Rachel for inviting me and for organizing for all of us to be here. So yeah, as Rachel said, I have been doing lucid dreaming and out-of-body exploration for quite a while, to the point where I now teach it, and I've been teaching probably for, well, almost a few decades now in various things. I started teaching remote viewing way back in 1999. If I don't look old enough for that, I am. Right, so just to give you a little bit of my background so you can understand where I'm coming from. I had a near-death experience when I was 5 years old. My father used to take me and my 3 brothers to the local dump for a weekend, local landfill, to put it better. And dump didn't sound right. So yeah, he used to take us to this local landfill on the weekends as a bonding measure, I guess, between father and sons. He was very emotionally shut down, but he tried his best, and this was one of the ways he did it. He was a builder, and he had to get rid of a bunch of junk at the end of the week, so he'd fill up the trailer, we'd help him fill it up, and we'd all go for a family sort of day out at the dump. Sorry, landfill. And, the landfill itself was an old fishery, so they had many fish ponds. Most of them were being filled up with rubbish. There were a few that still were operational in the sense that they had fish in them, their original intent. And I remember on this one occasion, I was 5 years old, and I was sort of leaning in, and I think I was just sort of observing my own shadow, not shadow, but reflection in the water. And I was quite mesmerized because I remember there being something, really interesting about the reflection, and I literally fell in. I wasn't a very good swimmer, and I sort of just plummeted to the bottom. And within seconds, there was calm, and there was this bright flash of light. And then I was standing again, dry as a bone, but somewhere else. And I remember it very vividly clear. It was a small city environment, and there was a really large tree, sort of ornamental tree as well. And I love climbing trees, so I just raced up the tree. And I wasn't thinking about the fact that I probably just drowned. It just wasn't within my awareness. And what was also interesting is I'm thinking back to that moment, the clarity that I had was beyond the child aspect of 5 years old. It was very interesting. And the way I'm articulating this to you now, obviously, is from an adult's way of languaging this. This is not how I would report it as a 5-year-old. So I'm up in this tree, and there's this sort of little crowd of people forming down below, and they weren't very pleased for some reason with me being in this tree. And there was then this call of my name, and I looked up, and there was another man. There was a man sitting on one of the branches higher up than me, and called me by name. He said, "Hi, Todd." And I looked up, and had curly hair, and he said, "You're not supposed to be here yet." And I was suddenly thinking about the people down below and thinking, oh, am I not supposed to be in this tree? And although this guy kept sort of, in a sense, verbalizing things, I could feel him in my mind. And he basically kind of had a chuckle, and he was like, yes, you probably shouldn't be in this tree either. I think this is sacred to these people. But I mean, you're not supposed to be here yet. And I then had sort of this clarity come into my mind that, oh yes, I have a physical body and it's currently underwater. And he said, we're going to get you some help. And there was another bright flash of light, and then I'm literally being wrestled out of the water by one of my older brothers. It was a really fascinating experience, and it left a really deep mark on my young mind, to the point where I started having lucid dreams about a month later after my 6th birthday. And I knew they were dreams, but I knew it was different, because where before dreams were very vivid, very clear, now they took on a solidness to them. And that was really interesting. Whereas before it almost seemed like I was an observer, or there was always like that, what we've described now as a narrative going on, suddenly I would become very conscious within this experience, and it would be as solid as physical waking reality. And I didn't question that very much. I just thought it was curious. And I started having these lucid dreams, and they never sort of presented themselves as waking reality, if you like. There were the narratives that you find in dreams. I never really saw, if I was in an environment, a dream environment that was like my bedroom, it wasn't really a good, fidelity representation of my bedroom. It was always very different. I would never see my physical body lying in bed. So what I'm trying to articulate right now is I don't think it was an out-of-body experience. I think they were dreams, these very personal spaces of consciousness that we can create, little virtual realities. I think the soul has an inbuilt virtual reality generator. It also has an inbuilt receiver to where it can receive signals from other virtual realities that it can then connect to. But I think each soul has an inbuilt personal VR generator. So about a couple months after the lucid dream started, I'd started having another type of experience, which I definitely couldn't articulate as an out-of-body experience at that age, because I just didn't have that knowledge and didn't have that vocabulary. But it was very different from the lucid dreams. And what would typically happen is, in a lucid dream, I would wake up within the dream already. I was never sort of went into a wake-induced lucid dream, which is called a wild. Typically, I always woke up within the experience somehow. Something would stand out that would make me question whether I was dreaming or whether I was awake. In this other type of experience, I was either going to sleep, or I would just wake up from sleep in the middle of the night, or something would wake me up from sleep. And one of those things used to be these all over sort of tingling sensations. Very powerful they were, actually. We call it the vibrational state. That's what I know it now as an adult. And then I would get, after that rush of energy, I would get this sensation as if I was on a roller coaster, and then I'd suddenly be standing in the middle of the bedroom. And I could look around and I could see my bedroom as if, I was walking around in my physical bedroom. And I would usually be able to see myself lying in bed. So I knew these two types of experiences were different, but I really couldn't sort of label them at that age. And it then sort of went on like this for the next 6 years until I was age 12, when it all sort of abruptly stopped. And I think it was a mixture of things, including ramping up for teenage years. It could have also been that I just wasn't being supported in physical reality in this way. Like, we have people we start to shut down sometimes as children if we don't have the proper support. Now, I did have support. My mother started keeping a journal for me at age 6. She'd always ask me at the breakfast table, because sometimes I'd call her in the middle of the night, because some of these experiences were challenging, to say the least. So she started keeping a journal for me. I'd sort of write some things down and draw stuff. And so, I did have that support. And I think my mother was very much into this sort of stuff when I was at that age. But I think the shutting down sometimes comes beyond that, immediate sort of parental level. Friends, I remember having friends that weren't having similar experiences, to the point where I had to stop talking about them because people started labeling me in with weird sort of nicknames. One of them being E.T. I was born in 1970. I saw when E.T., the film came out in the cinema. And I think it was in junior high school, I wore a t-shirt to school one day that said E.T. lives, and I was nicknamed E.T. forevermore. And so I think it started closing down because of my awkward sort of social, sort of situation. But during those years, I had a lot of very interesting things take place that really opened my eyes up from a very young age. So I'd start regularly having the lucid dreams and out-of-body experiences from age 6. And when I had the out-of-body experiences, it was sometimes with very much the same people. And I would sometimes meet the same children. And one thing I came to realize is that I was having out-of-body experiences with, again, this is an adult label I'm applying. I was having out-of-body experiences with my 3 brothers. I was having these experiences with friends. And sometimes when I reported, do you remember having this last night? You know, we were there and people would be like, no. And I really learned to keep this stuff to myself. I did have, you know, like I said, I could confide in my mother, but because she wasn't having experiences to that level, then, you know, it seemed like I was very lonely in that way. So, age 7 came, and I remember, again, very vividly, I was at school. It was year 2, I guess we'd call it over here, in the US where I grew up. It was 2nd grade, and the recess bell rang, and everybody went out to recess. And as I stood up away from my desk, it was like this force of gravity just overcame me, and I sat back down again. And I put my head down on the table, put my head down in my arms. And again, there was this really bright flash of light. And then I found myself standing on the other side of the room, of the schoolroom, and I could see myself with my head on the table. And there was a man there, and it was the curly-haired man again that I met during my near-death experience when I was 5 years old. And he said, "It's good to see you again, Todd." And he gave me a message. He said, which was very prophetic. He said, "I'm going to be with you up until you get married and you have your firstborn child. You're going to live overseas somewhere." And he said daughter, actually. And again, I was experiencing this clarity of mind that was beyond a 7-year-old, which I find really, intriguing. And I think this is the interesting thing about the out-of-body state. I mean, this is just this physical body. This, I think most of us are aware, this is not who and what we exclusively are. And I think we have an essence that survives death and precedes birth. And out-of-body experiences can give us a lot of clues and evidence as to our true nature. And it seemed like that was what I was being given from a very young age. So, it was a very quick experience, but he literally filled me with some very interesting information, almost sort of markers, milestone markers for my life. He mentioned, that he'd be with me until I was married. I would marry someone overseas, and my firstborn child would be a girl. 7-year-old, in the experience, it was a clarity of mind beyond 7-year-old, so I wasn't really like, ew, to all this stuff. But when I came back out of the experience, and that 7-year-old aspect was trying to process that, it's quite challenging for someone of that age to really sort of get your head wrapped around what was taking place. And again, if you don't have the support for it, then it can be a very lonely journey. And I think whether it's remote viewing, lucid dreaming, out-of-body experiences, meditation, I think we all need to have that inner support as well as that outer support. Sometimes I speak to my guides when I'm out of body as an adult, and I say to them, I wish I had more people around me who were having experiences to this level, because it can sometimes feel quite lonely. It seems like every time I'm having an interaction with other people, it's almost like I'm in teacher mode. And you really want to be a sort of walk away from that now and again and be around people who want to treat you, as an equal. And I think, it's just something that we all need to work at. When we are around people where, they have these circumstances, to remember, like UFO contactees or UFO abductees, they're everyday people. And I think when we marginalize them in some way, judgment, whatever it is, we really are sort of creating this disconnection, which really could be, I know it's a fear thing, without a doubt. Sometimes we fear what we don't understand. And when other people have experiences we're not having, there can be a fear there, even if it's an unconscious fear. And I think I had to learn how to manage that as a child. So I went on from that experience. My father died when I was 10 years old. And I remember waking up one morning, getting ready to go to school, and walked by his bedroom, and he was lying very awkwardly on the bed. And I knew in my mind, I could just feel it in all of my sort of being, that I wasn't going to see him again. And I remember my mother sort of shunting us off to school quite quickly, and came back home, and sure enough, he was gone. My mother was at the hospital, and there were some neighbors there that were attending to us. And for 2 weeks he was in hospital. It was only our oldest brother that was able to see him before he passed. And it felt it felt, to be honest, really horrible not to be able to say goodbye. And it's that it sort of just leaves something open there, and we want that closure. I remember for 2 months I cried pretty much every day. I grieved him every single day, and there came a moment. I remember waking up one morning, and my room is usually pitch black because I pull the blinds. There are shades. There's all kinds of contraptions. I liked it pitch black. And there was a sort of a figure standing at the end of my bed, and I had full waking sleeping paralysis. Anybody ever have any waking sleeping paralysis? When you don't know what it is, horrible, especially the hallucinations that can attend with it as well. This was one of my first experiences of sleep paralysis, and I was still getting used to it. But like I said, there was a figure standing at the end of the bed. It was almost like, a Force ghost from Star Wars. It was this glowing little image. And I had my father's voice in my head, and it was like a telepathic experience. And I remember lying there in that sleep paralysis, which was what I would now know, is not just a physical phenomenon. This waking sleep paralysis can also be, this representation of a multidimensional phenomenon. And I would call it the in-between state. So we're not quite in our bodies, we're not quite out of our bodies. And my father's voice was reassuring. He was saying, Todd, I'm safe. I'm in a place where I'm really happy. I'm with my mother. He hadn't seen his mother in a long time because his mother died when he was young. And, that gave me a lot of comfort. And it gave me the closure that I needed. I woke up after that experience, got on with my day, and it was as if the grief was just lifted away. And I think this is the one thing I really love about out-of-body experiences. It's like the internet. You can parallel it to the internet. When we go on holiday, how many here, use the internet to research the holiday destination before we go? We all probably do it. What's the rating? What are the customer reviews? What's the pool like? How close is it to the beach, depending on the holiday? We can gather all that information before we even go. And I see out-of-body experiences in exactly the same light. It's an opportunity for us to visit the afterlife before we die, to do a little Reiki. Where would I like to be? What kind of places do I really resonate with? Where's my loved ones that have gone before me? I think that can bring people a lot of comfort. And I think this is one of the things we're missing in society, is that, way to communicate with each other about this process of death, which is a doorway. And largely in society, it's like a taboo. We don't talk about it. We certainly don't talk about it in a positive way. And this is one of the things that I love when I run my retreats. I sometimes run 9-day retreats in France or Ireland or here in the UK. And we sort of either hire like a chateau or a big mansion house, and usually 40 or 50 people come for the 9 days. And you're immersed, in this energy of, the group of people who feel the same way. We may not have exactly the shared belief systems, but we're there out of this shared sort of desire to explore, to explore consciousness. So went on like this for a couple more years till age 12, and then it all started shutting down. And I sort of just started sort of forgetting about it. It's one of those things like a little bit of amnesia over something. Maybe you've moved a couple times in your life. How many times do you think about, some of the places that you've lived? Probably rarely. So it was one of those things where it just started to sort of get lost in my memories. And then age 14 came. I joined the Boy Scouts, and I remember every sort of Tuesday night we'd meet up at this church near where we lived, and me and the other boys would sort of come at least 30 minutes early so we could play hide and seek before the Scoutmasters arrived. Just have a bit of fun. And on this occasion, I wasn't one of the seekers, so I was sort of hiding. And I saw the seekers run off in other directions, and the home base, or homie, was the front steps of the church. And there was a couple steps, and then you have the main landing, which was all concrete. And so I thought, okay, this is my chance, and I sort of legged it for home base. And I sort of leapt up, thinking I'm going to clear both of these steps, and I'll be on the base, I'm quite clever. And I mistimed it, and I tripped over one of the steps, and I was running quite hard, very fast. And I literally, my arms didn't have any time to react, and I just face planted, the deck. And I mean, I just nailed right here on my head, and I literally bounced a few times. So, I mean, it was quite a shock. And I remember lying there in shock, and then sort of sitting up and looking around me, and it was such an interesting sight of what I was experiencing. It was like I could see multiple realities overlaid one another. I could see my physical reality, and then I could see objects and people that I knew were not really there. It was like my clairvoyance was just sort of switched on, or my third eye. Whatever that, sort of jolt was that I had, it wasn't just physical, it was energetic. And I was looking around me and seeing objects and, like I said, people that did not exist within, the reality that I knew. And then suddenly the reality that I was aware of almost came into like a tunnel vision, almost like a pinpoint. I could still see this other stuff, but my physical reality was disappearing. And it had just enough of a window open to where I could get up, walk indoors, and sit down and wait for the meeting to start. And I didn't tell anybody. I remember sitting there in shock the whole night, wondering why there's sort of people walking around the room that didn't belong there. And it was really quite interesting. I mean, literally my focus was another level of reality. But I could feel my physical body. I was aware of my physical body. I was aware of the chair I was sat in. I was aware of the table that my hands were on. But my overriding vision, if you like, was another reality. And the beings in that reality, some of them were very human. Some of them were non-human, from what I would now describe as an adult consciousness. And there seemed to be a sense of worry. And that was kind of alarming in a sense, because that sort of window that was open up, that psychic window that was open up, came with sort of that telepathic stuff as well. And I could sense this unease. My mother came to collect me. I didn't tell her about my fall. I probably should have done. I remember going to bed, and I woke up in the early hours of the morning, and it was standing out of my body, just like the previous years where I would have the out-of-body experiences. I could see my physical body, and I was sort of just standing there, and there was a guy next to me that I didn't look at straight away, but I knew he was there, and there was these beings sort of hovering around my physical body. And then the man next to me sort of spoke up, and he said, "Hello, Todd." And I looked over, and it was the curly-haired man again. By that time, I was starting to realize this person must be looking after me. This must be somebody of significance to me. And he said to me, "My name's Blue. Last time we met, I didn't give you my name, but my name is Blue. I've been looking after you, and I'm still going to look after you for, a few years to go still." And he said, "You had quite a bit of a tumble. We're quite worried about, your physical body. They're working on your energy field right now." And, to have this sort of reported to you, again, age 14, when you're not aware of things like energy mechanics, auric fields, energy body, chakras, all this stuff, they weren't exactly using words describing that stuff in the way that we do, but it was the same stuff. They were talking about energy. They were talking about clearing energy, building energy. And I remember him saying something about, they're working on you and repairing this stuff. And suddenly I started thinking about my physical vision. Because in physical reality, my vision, wasn't 20/20 or perfect. And I would always have to sit in the front row of school so I could see the chalkboard and read it clear enough. So I suddenly had this question in my mind. I wonder if they could repair my vision while they're at it. And that's when this guy Blue, again, it was almost like in my head, he said, "Your falling over was an accident, which we can intervene. Your eyesight," and he didn't use this word, but I'm using this word, "your eyesight is karmic." He was describing it in a different way, but as an adult now, that's exactly what he was saying. It's karma. It's something that I would have to work out for myself. And, this kind of stuff, I think, if we were taught these things from a very young age, and I know most of you here are probably sort of in that same vein of thinking, what a different world we would have right now if we were aware of energy. Just like with the last speaker, Simon Park was talking about something like, yes, we can feel when people are We can feel their psychic energy. We can feel their emotions. And I think it's important to realize, there is a difference between somebody being, emotionally upset and you are feeling that energy through the ethers and a full-on sort of psychic attack. There's a huge difference. And I think when we're very grounded in that awareness, it enables us to be more in a more of a loving place instead of in our ego. And I think that's really important for everyone. Because whether we take it as an attack, their emotional upset, which you will feel, your ego will. And even if you don't respond in that egoic way and you respond with love, they might still feel, that you have countered with an emotional attack. Because all minds are joined. And I think sometimes when people are in a very sort of bad way emotionally, they're not in that space to where they can be very loving. And even if we are being loving in return, return to them, they may not feel it. They could be blocking it. So I think when we are aware of energy and we are aware of that psychic link that we all have, we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility that when we have a negative thought about somebody, probably because they're thinking negatively about us, realizing that how I respond, they will feel. On some level, they will feel it. Whether or not consciously, they will feel it unconsciously. How would you like them to feel in return? It's really up for us to make that shift. And it can be challenging, of course, when we get triggered. But I think it's very important to have that difference of awareness that, all minds are joined. If somebody is upset, you are going to feel that. It does not mean it's a conscious attack. There really are, they're two different things. And I think the majority of people, it is that, emotional overwhelm that we're feeling from them. They're feeling unsafe. They're not feeling certain about something. They're feeling insignificant. That's a huge difference from a full-on psychic attack. So this is how it sort of proceeded for me. I remember that experience came to an end. I left age 17. I was feeling really restless. High school wasn't working out for me very well. I just couldn't stay focused. I was daydreaming all the time. I was always in my imagination. And eventually I just gave up on high school. I left before I graduated, and I went hitchhiking. And I remember the day I was leaving, my mother handed me this notepad, which was, the journaling stuff that she'd kept. And I kept that with me up until points in my hitchhiking days. I was 3 years hitchhiking around the U.S. And this is when it was almost like my rites of passage as a young man to become a man. Those years were very defining for me. I started to figure out who I was, in that wilderness, if you like. And it was a wilderness at times. I hitchhiked as far as Alaska. I'd be out in the wilderness of Alaska and, just getting completely lost in that energy to find myself. And when I was 23 years old, I came over to the UK and I flew over, and I've been here ever since. I started having the out-of-body experiences and lucid dreams again from age 35. I'm 47 years old now. And so for the last sort of 13 years, this has been my life, fully into this stuff, having some very profound experiences, including with, ET phenomena, non-human intelligences, which I'm very happy to talk about. So I want to give you a little bit of grounding in who I am, what I think, about reality, that original hard question, what is reality? I think this is why most of us are here. We all have that big question. Where did we come from? Where are we going? Are we alone? Are there others out there? And from the experiences I've had with my out-of-body experiences, astral projecting experiences, I've formed a very different belief system than what I used to have in my early 20s. In my early 20s, I used to read prolifically every time it was out, and I'd reread, and again, it was UFO magazine. I think it was Graham Birdsell, who used to be the editor, who died at some point, I think, quite a young age, actually, in his late 40s or 50s. And I used to just consume every word of that magazine, because it seemed like the link that I had to that paranormal. I now realize, after many years of out-of-body exploration, the paranormal is just an artifact of a much bigger environment. And that's given me a completely different peace of mind, because where I would now call myself a truth seeker, because I think the conspiracy sort of label is meant to really shut down conversation from those who are not involved in truth-seeking. To call us conspiracy theorists, it literally is meant to shut down conversation, to make you look bad, because of the meaning that society at large, mainstream, sort of holds for that word. And there was years where I went, I was really into the David Icke stuff. I was really angry at the political scene with regards to during those years George Bush, the father, the senior, and then later on George Bush Jr. coming into power and sort of keeping it for years longer than he meant to. I was really angry at that time, and the fear mind was really active in me at that time. And it was when I started having these out-of-body experiences again, I started to realize that yes, there is that big sort of conspiracy, if you like, to suppress who and what we really are, which is more than just these physical beings. We're multidimensional beings. We're not just a physical body on a physical world in a physical universe. We are more than that. We are way more than that. And I think that's what I love. Why I love talking about astral projection, because it gives people the means to actually, for themselves, to travel to these other sort of non-physical locations. And I say non-physical with sort of inverted quotes, because this is another thing, with regards to that radical shift in the way I would view things now versus what I did in my 20s. In my 20s, I always thought the UFO phenomena, was a very physical thing in general. They were multidimensional, but it was always very physical, that they came from another physical planet within the universe. I don't think that way exclusively anymore. I think from what I've experienced in all my years of out-of-body exploration, I now see the universe as being this sort of infinite frequency domain, if you like. And we have this sort of space and time domain that gets created within that. We can have these very individual space and time domains created within that bigger, sort of wider energy field. And I think just like our TV signals, our radio signals, our mobile phone telecoms, sort of signals, all of these are jumbled around us right now. But yet, if we get onto the mobile phone, it's a clear communication. We don't have a radio signal breaking into that communication, because all of those signal operators, the telecoms companies, the radio company, they've all agreed to operate on distinct frequencies within that bigger frequency domain. And to me, the multidimensional universe is exactly like that. We're dealing with that infinite frequency domain. We have this essence, which literally has a built-in signal generator as well as a receiver. We can receive signals from these various realities. We call them other dimensions of reality. To me, when we talk about something like physical reality as an example, I don't see this as we have exclusivity on physicality, the solidness of this experience. When we have lucid dreams, they can be as solid and real and literally have physicality. And to me, that is evidence that reality is probably a relativistic sort of model. And your perspective within reality, when I'm on the astral planes and I'm in astral cities, those environments are physically real. They're solid. It's physicality. When I'm then sort of in my body coming back to the physical plane, and I'm not quite back in my body, the physical plane seems like a ghost. It just doesn't seem real. But the moment my awareness shifts back into my physical body, it's solid again to me. And so to me, it's a matter of your perspective of reality, where you are within reality. But to me, this is no more than a construct, a mental construct, if you like, a virtual reality. And physicality is a set of equations. And what's interesting is, quantum physics actually supports that. They say they can create equations that can create physicality.